Everyone to be here, and I'm presenting a paper, Consumer Profiling by Information Design, with Itay and Ruslan. And so I'm going to proceed as follow. I'm going to have a very short motivation, and then I'm going to show you the model. Then I will stop, and then I will present the result and the proof of the result. If there is any question, please, you can ask at any point. So the motivation is very simple and is based on this statement. So what we are going to do in this paper, we're going to think carefully about this statement. We always think that rich data sets and online transactions allow intermediary, let's say platforms, to learn the consumer preferences, including the willingness to pay. Okay? And what this paper does is really try to think to what extent indeed an intermediary like a platforms can learn the willingness to pay of consumers. Okay? And just to give you an idea, in order to learn the willingness to pay of the consumers, you need to have price experimentation. You need to offer consumers different prices so that you understand at which point they are not willing anymore to buy. That's what is the willingness to pay. But in a lot of situations, platforms do not control the price directly. Okay? And so platforms need to try to persuade sellers to do price experimentations. But the way in which platform can persuade seller to do the price experimentation depends on the information that the platforms have about consumers' willingness to pay, and the information that platforms have depends on experimentation that occurred in the past. So there is a kind of a circle here where, in order to try to learn more about consumers, I need to induce a seller to price experiment, but this experimentation needs to be incentive compatible with the seller, and the way in which I can manipulate this incentive compatibility is by offering different information. But this is information that I have some information about the consumer, but not all. So the question is, how much can a platforms be able to learn about the willingness to pay of the consumer by persuading seller to experiments? That's going to be the question that we're going to have in this talk. Okay? And to make it a little bit more, again, to finish the motivation, I'm going to think about the platforms learns about willingness to pay by observing purchasing decisions of consumers. However, there is going to be a friction. The friction is that the platforms cannot set prices. The platforms can only influence the formation of prices via market segmentations. That is, by providing certain information to the seller. The seller can price discriminate using the segmentation that the platforms provide. And what information on the willingness to pay can the platform learn is really the questions of this talk. And we are also going to talk a little bit about the welfare implications. Now, and I want to be like super clear since the beginning, I'm going to consider a setting where where the seller in particular has no incentive to price experiment. So I'm going to think a framework in which the seller enters the market, price, and exit. And then in another period, there is a new seller, enter the market, price, and exit. So the seller, they price in every period to maximize their stage utility. Okay? And I'm also going to start with a situation where consumers are myopic, in the sense that they buy if their offer price is above their value, and they don't buy, they buy their offer a price below their value, and they don't buy the prices above their value. Okay? So that the consumers here have no incentive to try to hide information. And within this context, I'm going to ask how much the platforms is able to learn. Okay, the problem is going to be rich enough to provide some interesting results, and then we can talk a little bit about what happens when consumers are not myopic, and what happens if sellers are also forward-looking. But this is going to be the second part. The first result is going to be based on this benchmark. Now, I'm happy to take question now, but this is just a motivation. I'm also, if you can also wait 5 minutes, I also presented the model, so it's all clear exactly what we're talking about. So in the model, I have a unit mass of consumers. Consumers have a unit demand at every period, so this is a repeated purchase. Each consumer has a characteristic, C, and there is a final set of characteristics, N. Characteristics is not willingness to pay. Okay? So characteristics, I want you to think about a characteristic as being something that allows to identify an individual. Maybe it's the gender, maybe it's the location, or maybe it's a vector of all those things. And to start with, there is this set of consumers, this unit mass of consumers are divided in these categories, and X star C is the mass of consumer with characteristic C. Now, characteristics is different from willingness to pay. However, consumers that have the same characteristics have the same willingness to pay. I want to think about a situation in which I have all these consumers, they are divided in categories, they're categorized, and if you are in a particular category, I know that you have that they all share the same willingness to pay. And the assumption is that at the very beginning of the game, of the environment, a type C draws a valuation from a distribution F with CDF F, and the support is 0 and V bar. Once the valuation is drawn, every consumer with characteristic C knows that their evaluation is V star C. This is the realized value. This is observed by the consumer, but not by the platform. The platform doesn't know what is the value of the consumer. The platforms only know the characteristic of the consumer. So ex ante, the platform only know that the value of the consumers are drawn from this distribution F. Okay? This distribution for this first part is the same for all individuals with the same characteristics, but of course, individuals with different characteristics will draw a different value. The basic assumption is the myopic decision rule. A consumer with characteristic C will receive an offer P in period T, except whenever the value is bigger than the price. Okay? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this relates to non-myopic consumers. But for the moment, I'm just taking these myopic consumers. Now, the platforms does not directly observe the consumer willingness to pay. The platform aware observe each consumer characteristic. And if I take an history, what is an history in this environment is going to be a sequence of prices that each of the sellers charge and up to period T, and all the acceptance and rejection decision of all the consumers up to period T. So if I take a particular history, I know all the prices that have been charged to all consumers up to that period. I know all the purchasing decision of all consumers up to that period. And based on this, I can update, the platform will be able to update beliefs and will be able to have learned something about the consumer evaluation of consumers with different characteristics. Okay? Now, what the platform is going to do in every period T is going to offer a segmentation to the seller. And the way in which we think about market segmentation is like Bergman and Brooks and Morris. So we're going to formalize exactly in the same in that way. The only difference is that in the standard environment, the designer knows the valuation of each consumer. So it's going to segment consumers based on their value. Here, we can only segment consumers based on their characteristics. Okay? So at any period T, the platform is going to choose a market segmentation. What is a market segmentation? It's a distribution over a set of markets. What is a market? A market is just a vector that describes the proportion of consumers of each characteristics. So a particular X is a market, is a vector with dimension n, with dimension of the number of characteristics, where X of C will be the proportion of consumer with characteristic C in that particular market. Now, to each market is associated a demand. What is the demand? The demand is what the platform has learned about the consumer of that particular characteristic, given all the database that the platform observes. So this is just the Bayesian updating posterior of the willingness to pay of each consumer with characteristic C, and the demand is just aggregate all this information depending on the composition of the market. And sigma is just a set of finite market segmentation, which a market segmentation where a market segmentation is nothing more than a probability distribution over markets. Okay, so let me just give you an example, because this is like, if you like, is the heaviest slides with notations. Let me just give you a very simple example. Suppose that we start with three types of consumer: red, blue, and green. These are the characteristic, are color: red, blue, and green. And we know that there are half of the consumers are red, a quarter are blue, and a quarter are green. So this is the market. This is the distribution of characteristics. Now, what is a possible market segmentation? A possible market segmentation is one where we create two markets, market X1 and market X2. In market X1, we only have red consumers. In market H2, we have red consumer, blue consumers, and green consumer in equal proportion. Of course, when we construct this market, we need to be sure that when we aggregate, we get back to the original market. Okay? And this is done by taking this market with probability a quarter. So in this market, we're going to get a quarter times all the red. Then we're going to get a quarter times all the red. In total, we're going to get half of the red. And here we're going to get a quarter times, sorry, this market is taken with probability 3/4. So we're going to get 3/4 times a quarter of the blue, which makes them a third. So we make them a quarter, which was the original proportion of consumers that are blue, and the same for the green. So I start with this market, but what I can do, I can give to the seller this market segmentation. And now when the seller receives this market segmentation, the seller can charge a price to market X1 and can charge a price to market X2. Okay, so can price discriminate? Okay. Now the idea that the platform, by creating this market segmentation, can create potentially different prices for market X1 and market X2. So I can take consumers that have the same characteristics, they're all red, but they may receive different prices. This is what price experimentation is, and therefore I can learn. And the whole question of the paper is how much, power do you get by doing market segmentation, given that your objective is to learn the willingness to pay of the consumers. Okay? So this is the last slide. A seller, these sellers, just think about in every period, there is a different seller. When the seller arrives, the seller see the market segmentations, also observe the demand, and the price that is going to charge is going to be a price that maximizes the profit. So you can think about this P star being a price recommendation given by the platforms, and the price recommendation is to be incentive compatible. Okay? So the price is not chosen by the platform. The price is chosen by the seller in an incentive compatible way. But what the platform can do, can create these segmentations so that maybe different consumers with the same characteristic can get different prices. And by doing that, I can learn. Okay? I can learn about the demand. And I want to understand how much I can learn. We're going to make an assumption, which is kind of standard, that is the demand is the aggregate demand is well behaved. Okay, this is if you like, standard regularity conditions in mechanism design. Okay, so it's not very demanding. And that's it. This is the model. So I'm happy to stop and get any question about it. Because what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to show you a couple of definitions and then the main result of the paper. Yes, Dimitri.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. So I missed one point. So the economy, meaning the set of sellers and buyers, it remains the same over time, or the sellers and buyers somehow arrive and
Okay, so in
substitute
every
each other?
period, there is a unit mass of consumer and there is one seller in every period. Okay, now you can think about that in every period, there are two interpretations that you can have. One is that in every period, there is a different seller. Or you can think that there is always one seller, but the seller is myopic. And for the consumers, you can do the same. You can think about that there is this unit mass of consumers, and they are myopic, and they are there forever. They every day they can buy a new product, they can buy the same product. It's a repeated purchase, and they are myopic. And their value is drawn at the beginning. Or you can think that in every period there is a new set of consumers with the same characteristic, and the value is persistent.
Okay, so just let me just please summarize, so if I understand correct. So basically what you want to analyze, both sellers and buyers, they are not forward-looking in some sense, right? They are short-term living. They maximize their objective only in one period, but the platform is sort of forward-looking platform, right? Is it more or less correct?
Yeah, so absolutely, you're absolutely right about the consumer and the seller. The platforms are not even postulating an objective. Okay, I'm thinking about here the platforms as being a designer, and I want to see with this tool of the platform, which is market segmentation, what is the maximum learning.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yes, Ariel.
Yes, I have one question, Andrea. One point I missed, but I don't know, but it's not part of your model. A lot of platforms have dynamic processes within the demand process. If you are a consumer or buyer, you see during the demand process if the product you are choosing is cheap or in the middle or in the high priced. So you change your action within the demand process, not in the next period within the demand process. Well, if you're in Germany, if you go on the car, if you buy a car on Auto Scout, you see if the car you have chosen is in a higher level segment on the buyer side from the seller side, or in the lower. So you change your alternative. You abort the demand process, or you're looking for alternatives, or you negotiate. You start to negotiate with the seller and said, "Hey, is this really the last price you have?" And Google is the same. If you buy a television or other electronic devices, you see alternative sellers with the cheaper price and the same product. In the same moment, you are demanding. And so you change in the procedure. So you carve this out in your model and said, okay, this is one static process. You just look on characteristics, gender, culture, age, as you said, and you are not cooking. You're looking on the dynamic process within the demand, with new informations within the demand process. Is this right?
Yeah, so I'm not allowing to. Yeah, you're right. So the design here of the platforms is limited to start with on creating this market segmentation. They cannot do anything more than that. Okay, and you're right that that there are other things that platform can do. I will touch upon later on. Not maybe exactly in your example, but
it's too complex. Yeah, it's too complex.
Yeah, what and how this additional instrument can complement this. So if you like, here I'm just looking at a very, if you like, pure problem where the only thing I can do is to create this repackaging consumers and says, look, this is a group of consumers that have a high willingness to pay.
Higher willingness to pay. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay.
And yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome, Daniel.
Thank you. Yes, I was thinking a little bit what is going on when there is competition. Because to me, it seems your model requires a monopoly pricing situation somehow. Is this correct?
So we do have, we do have an extensions where we have competition. When you have of course, if you have a perfect Bertrand, then there is not much you can do. But if you have if you are in a model where you have product differentiation, okay, then once you fix the price of the competitor, then you are a monopoly on the residual demand. So the result that I'm going to present here, it translates to a competition model. We have an example where we have a hotelling Bertrand model, okay? And I can tell you a little bit about how it translates. But if you think about in an hotelling model where somebody is located at 0 and the other is located at 1, consumers that are close to you are consumers that you are monopoly, okay? In the sense that you have a lot of market power because they're very close to you. So everything that I'm going to say translates if you think about whenever I say people with very high willingness to pay, essentially are the people that are close to you, okay? They have a high willingness to pay to you relative to the competitor, okay? So competition here is not going to change much of the message of the paper, as long as there is some product differentiation, and hence there is some market power.
Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so let me just at the beginning of this game, the platforms only know that the willingness to pay of any characteristic is drawn by a CDF, by a function that is a CDF f. So ex ante, the demand that the platform knows is 1 minus f of p. Okay, that's what at the beginning the platform knows, but the demand can be very different from that. And I want to know, after doing all these market segmentations across periods, what can you learn about the demand? Okay, and to state the result, which is going to be in not the next slide, but the slide after, I just need to give you these two definitions. So the first definition is just tell you, I'm going to use a lot this symbol P at 1. This is nothing more than the uniform price that you will charge in the first period. P, 1 minus f of p, is your profit, given the knowledge that you have the demand at the beginning, and this is just the monopoly price. Okay, so P at 1 is the monopoly price, when you cannot price discriminate, and the only thing you know is that the demand is 1 minus f of p. The second definition is the definition of learning. So I'm going to say fix an epsilon. Epsilon here is like how much accurate you're learning. And I'm going to say that the platform epsilon learns the willingness to pay of consumer with characteristic C if the platform posterior assign probability 1 to the value of consumer C being very close to the true value. Okay. And I'm going to say that there is epsilon full learning below V if the platform's epsilon learns the willingness to pay of all consumers with the characteristic C such that their true value is less than V. Okay? So epsilon learn, it means if I epsilon learns about characteristic C, it means that my posterior place probability 1 to the value being very close to the true value. And there is epsilon for learning below V if I epsilon learn about all the consumers that have a willingness to pay below V. Okay? Is the definition clear? Good. So now I'm going to give you the main result. The main result is the following, is that the first part is that fix any information design, fix any realizations of the true valuation, so any true demand, and take any period t bigger than 1. If the value of a consumer is above the monopoly price, then the platform posterior is that the willingness to pay of these consumers is distributed according to the original F truncating at the optimal uniform price on the support. So essentially, if your value is above the optimal uniform price, the only thing I learn is that your value is above P at 1. I don't learn anything else. Okay? That's the only thing I learn. So if I am in the uniform 0, 1, the optimal price, marginal cost here is normalized to 0, the optimal price is half. If your value is above half, the only thing I learn is that your value is above half. I don't learn anything else. Okay? However, if your value is below the monopoly price, then for any epsilon, there exists an information design and the time and the number of characteristics, so that if the number of characteristics is sufficiently large, then with probability almost 1, you learn everything below at P1. So the result here is very different. If your valuation is below the uniform optimal price, then the platforms can construct an information design to learn essentially what your value is. However, if your value is above the uniform price, then the platforms will only learn that your value is above the uniform price. Let me just put a picture. Suppose that this is the black curve is the real demand. This is an example where there are 3 types, 3 characteristics, and the black curve is the real demand. This is the uniform, and the platforms believes that the values are drawn uniformly between 0 and 1. So this is the demand that the platforms estimate at the very beginning based on the price. What this result tells you is that you will never learn anything about this part of the demand. Here, the optimal P at 1 is 0.5. So it doesn't matter what is the information design that you use. You will always have this estimation of the demand for consumers that have a value above 0.5. However, for consumers that have a value below 0.5, you learn essentially the whole demand. So you learn below, but you don't learn above. And I pause a second. I just want to be sure that this result is clear. What I'm claiming is clear. And then I'm just going to give you the proof of the first part and the second part, which says, and I'm going to give you the proof because it has economics. Yes, Daniel.
Sorry for a question. So as soon as you don't learn or platform cannot learn anything above a 0.5, it could somehow still update the distribution, which could potentially shift the uniform price again a little bit up.
Yeah. I mean, of course, we are taking that. The point is that's not true. But yes, I'll show you the proof. Okay, but this is the results. Okay, so you're asking me how is it possible that this is true, and I'm going to show you the proof in the second in the next slides. Okay, but so let me just first of all ask: is the statement correct? Not correct. Is the statement clear? Sorry, correct. This is my. Yeah. Daniel, is the statement clear? Okay, so now let me show you why you don't learn above this. Okay, and then why you learn everything below. The fact that you don't learn above. Okay, now the first period, as Daniel was saying, okay, you are setting this uniform price. So what it means that you're gonna learn all the individuals that have a characteristics above the uniform price and all the characteristics that have a value below the uniform price. That's what happened in the first period. Okay. Now, what can you do in the second period? Well, in the second period, first of all, consider only a market. Suppose that you create a market where you put together only consumers that have a value above the uniform price. What Daniel was saying, okay, now the distributions is not anymore uniform between 0 and 1. Suppose that we start with uniform 0 and 1. Now it's not uniform between 0 and 1. It's going to be uniform between half and 1. Okay? If it was not uniform, now it's going to be F truncated at the lower bar, at P at 1. Now, before, in the first period, when I was choosing P at 1, I didn't want to lower P at 1 because P at 1 was optimal. Now, in this new market, I don't have anybody below P at 1. Clearly, I don't want to lower it. That's clear. But Daniel says, well, but maybe you want to raise it a little bit. Okay? But actually, no, you cannot, you don't want to raise it a little bit because, you know, when you start raising the price, the inframarginal losses and the inframarginal gain and the gains are exactly the same as before. This is a distribution that is truncated from below. So the proportion, the changes in the gains that you face by slightly increase the price is exactly the same as before. So when you truncate from below, the optimal price doesn't change. It's just a rescaling of your demand. Okay? So the optimal price is not changing. In the uniform, you can just do it. You can do the math in your mind. When the uniform is between 0 and 1, the optimal price is half. Now, if I give a uniform between half and 1, the optimal price will still be half. Another way of thinking about, I didn't want to exclude people with the value above P at 1 before. Now, why do I want to exclude them? I also don't want to exclude them. If it wasn't optimal before, it means that, you know, getting a bit of higher margin was not worth it given that I was going to lose a bit of consumers. But now I'm exactly in the same situation as before with respect to consumers that have a valuation above RP1. It's just that now I am rescaling this by the fact that I have a lower mass. But the proportion of types from P at 1 to 1 is the same as before. The composition of that market. So I didn't want to exclude those people before. I don't want to exclude it even now. Okay? Now, how can I induce higher prices? Well, if I cannot induce higher prices by putting together everybody in Cs, the only thing I can do in period 2 is to take in some consumer with a willingness to pay above P at 1 and put it together with some consumer that have a willingness to pay below P at 1. But if I do so, clearly the optimal price is not going to increase because I am adding consumer that have a lower value. I'm making the demand only more elastic, which means that if anything, I will only decrease the price. So there is no way in which I can induce prices above the uniform price, the uniform optimal price. Okay? And note that this has nothing to do with, in fact, with not even the IGFR. This is, very, very general. You can give me any demand. The IGFR here implies that there is an optimal price P at 1. If I have a general F, I can have multiple optimal prices. Well, then the statement will hold if you take the maximum of all those. Okay? Daniel, does it make sense?
Yes, but how does myopic sellers then come in? Because I think this is just, if I would...
Well, very good. Yeah, okay, so good. So myopic, very good. So now we can say, okay, what happens if consumers are not myopic? What happens if sellers are not myopic? Now, I'm going to just give you like one very short answer, okay? Now, if sellers are non-myopic, then, when you look at this price would be something different. We're not going to be at P1, will be whatever it is given the continuation and so on and so forth. But once you fix some discount factor, unless it's 1, is there going to be some bound? And then the result will go through with that. Okay? And so somehow there is this difficulties to learn above this at P1. I'm going to tell you how to break this result. Okay? But, it's quite robust. So the one I want to do now, I want to show you the second part of the result, this one. How do I create an information design that allow me to learn everything below it. Okay? And the way in which we have done it is by creating an information design characterized by two phases. The first phase, I create markets which are homogeneous in the sense that I only put together consumers that the platforms has the same posterior about their willingness to pay. Okay, so these are homogeneous segmentations. I do this for a certain number of periods until I've been able to get a good idea about the value of the different characteristics. Once I've done that, I create segments where I mix consumers with different valuations. And in that moment, I create a lot of price experimentation. Okay, this is going to be the way in which I'm going to do it. And let me tell you, so first of all, the first phase, I'm going to have a consumer homogeneous market segmentation. That is, I'm going to create markets where I'm going to put only consumer with the same characteristics. So the very beginning, any market segmentation that I do will induce the same price because every value comes from the same distribution. And we know the price is P at 1. Now what happened? At the end of period 1, I have learned that this consumer have a value distributed according to F truncated at P at 1. These consumers have a value between 0 and P at 1. So it's distributed according to F truncated above by P at 1. Now what I'm going to do to the seller, I'm going to give a market with only blue consumer, and I'm going to give a market with only red consumers. When the seller gets a market with blue consumer, we have already shown is going to charge P at 1. But when I give a market with only red consumers, now it's going to charge a price below P at 1. So let's say P at 2. P at 2 is the optimal price when I give you this market. At the end of period 2, what do I learn? Well, I didn't learn anything more about these guys, but now I learn all the consumers that have a value between P at 2 and P at 1. These are the consumers that did not buy in period 1, but in period 2, they receive a price P at 2, they decided to buy. And then there are those consumers that in the first 2 periods didn't buy. They rejected P at 1 and they rejected P at 2. In period 3, I'm gonna give the seller 3 markets: the blue market, the red market, and the green market. The price to the blue market will still be P at 1. The price to the red market will still be P at 2 for the same reason that here the price is still P at 1. And the price for the green market is gonna be below. So now I start learning more below. Okay? So I do this for a bunch of periods. Okay? And once I've done this, I got to a situation in which for each consumer with characteristic C, I have learned whether the consumer is in the blue, the orange, the green, the pink, or the purple. Okay? Now, at that point, I stop and I go to phase 2. You see, here I didn't learn a lot. You know, if a consumer is here, I only learned that the valuation is between P at 2, P at 1. I want to learn exactly what the valuation is. So the way in which now we're going to do that in one period, we're going to create a lot of price experimentation. And in particular, what we're going to do, we're going to take some of the blue and some of the orange. When I mix these two guys, I can induce any price between P at 2 and P at 1. Because by mixing these two guys, I'm mixing high value consumer with low value consumer. And by mixing appropriately, I can induce any price between P at 2 and P at 1. Since I can create markets that are relatively small, I do like really, I kind of do something that is like A/B experimentation. I create a lot of small markets with all these different compositions, and I create a lot of different prices that consumers that are of the same characteristic are exposed to. So at the end of that period, I will be able to learn exactly everything about their valuations. Okay? Let me just be a little bit more specific. So this is what I learned after having done this consumer homogeneous information design. I learned for every individual with characteristic C, I learned in which segments they are. These segments here. these segments in the uniforms are exactly these numbers here, okay? Then what I'm going to do, I'm going to do the following. Suppose that I want to learn the valuation of consumers between P at 3 and P at 2. So if I only give the B segment to the seller is going to charge P at 3 by construction. If I only give the green, the seller is going to charge P at 2 by constructions. Okay? So now what I can do, I can create markets. These are going to be this market here, where I take all the red and I add a bit of green. By doing this, I'm going to move the price from, I'm going to move the demand from being red or green to this middle demand here, which means that I'm going to move the price from P at 3 to anything that I want up to P at 2. If I create a market where I only put the green, I get P at 2. If I only have the red, I put P at 3. By combining them, I can get any price between P at 2 and P at 3. Okay? And no, I can do this by creating very small market. The only thing that I care is the relative proportion of the two types in this market. Okay, so I can create any price, and in particular, I can create a lot of prices which are different by epsilon, and then in that way, essentially what I've done the ideal experimentation where I've taken the same consumer and I offer the different prices until I see when the consumer stop buying. Okay, and this leads to the results. Okay, so it's actually, I think the nice things about this second is that it's very simple. The construction is very natural. I first take characteristic by characteristics. I don't do anything. I just let the seller price to this homogeneous market. Once I've done this, I learn, if you like, a smaller bucket in which consumers belong to of different characteristics. And then at that point, I can mix them in a way to create a lot of price experimentation. Now, the last things I want to say, why do I need that n is large? Okay, I need that n is large because when I'm here, when I created all this bucket, in order to create this price experimentation where I can cover all the prices between close to 0 and P at 1, I need to have that in each of these buckets, there is at least one characteristic. Okay, so if I have a lot of characteristics, then this is with probability essentially 1. Okay, that's the only reason why I need that. If I have some consumer here and some consumer here and I have nobody in the green, I cannot induce all the prices because at some point there's going to be some jump. Okay, and that's why I need a large number of characteristics. Okay, so where is the result? I have more in the paper, but I'm happy to get questions about this. Okay, so there are different things that we have done in the paper, and I'm going to. There is something about the speed of learning that I am going to skip. Let me just give you what are the welfare implications of these results. So first of all, it's clear that you start where there is inefficiency because consumers below RP1 are excluded, and we have seen that there are a lot of information designs in which you can learn everything. So, and all the consumers are going to be included by these market segmentations. So, allowing to process these informations, not surprisingly here, increase welfare. It increases welfare in a way that actually consumer surplus does not decrease. Because remember, at the very beginning, the only consumer that are served at the price of P at 1. Over time, those consumers always buy at P at 1. So those consumers are never worse off The other consumers are excluded at the beginning, so over time they can only be better off. So here is like is everybody's gaining from here. Consumers are gaining, the seller is gaining, or sellers over time are getting better off, and the outcome become more efficient. Okay. And the other result that we have is that this is actually quite clear, quite straightforward. This is the lower bound on the seller. This is the profit that the seller gets at the very beginning. And of course, there is no way in which the seller cannot get this. This is the deadweight loss that there is at the beginning. And it's clear that since you can learn everything about the value of those consumers, you can also then at some point give all this surplus to the seller. So an upper bound is going to be this part here. And similarly for the consumer, this is a consumer surplus that the consumer has. And now the consumers will always get this consumer surplus because there is no possible of having price experimentation above P at 1. And it's also possible actually to give all the deadweight loss to the consumers in the long run. And the way this actually takes a bit of time to work, but essentially, if you knew exactly the valuation of the consumers, then you can apply the uniform, the profit-preserving segmentation of Bergman, Brooks, and Morris. Here, you never learn exactly the valuations. You learn it with some imprecisions, but there is a continuity argument that you can apply to that constructions. Okay. So if you like, if the platforms or the designer knew exactly the valuation of consumers, then we know that the surplus triangle is this one. When the platform start without knowing the valuation of the consumer, but only know the aggregate demand, then the surplus outcome that can be induced is the smaller triangles. Okay? Where this is the consumer surplus that the consumer get under uniform, under the monopoly price, because that one cannot be you cannot extract it from the consumers. Okay, so this is the relation to the limit of price discrimination. Any question on this? So let me just tell you a couple of extensions. So first of all, you may wonder what happens if consumers are non-myopic. Okay. Now here is actually clear that in our game, there is always an equilibrium where consumers behave myopically. Because if everybody behaves myopically, so I have a characteristic C and all my fellow with my characteristic behave myopically, then if I deviate, so first of all, if I behave myopically, then I get a certain continuation. And if I deviate, now I can create an out of equilibrium beliefs where the platforms ignore a single individual that deviates with the same characteristic. Since the platform observes the characteristic of the individual, if the platform see that everybody except Dimitri buys at a particular price, the designer can just say, okay, Dimitri has made a mistake. I ignore whatever Dimitri has done, so I'm not going to update my beliefs about the type of Dimitri and all the other people that have the same characteristic of Dimitri. I use the behavior of the majority of the people that have the same characteristic as Dimitri, but then the continuations is not changing by deviating. So why do you want to lose money today and instead of just following the myopic rule that maximizes your state utility? In fact, in our environment, if you put some reasonable off-equilibrium belief, you can actually show that any symmetric strategy profile that is part of a perfect Bayesian equilibrium will require that the strategy of the buyer is a myopic decision rule. Okay? And again, the idea is that suppose that we coordinate in, let's say, rejecting a price which is below our valuation. So we are leaving some money in the table today because we hope that tomorrow we're going to get better deals. Okay. Now, if Dimitri at that point deviates, now the platform will see that one single individual is deviated and all the other people with the same characteristic as Dimitri have actually took different actions. Okay. So if you make the assumption that in that off equilibrium belief, the beliefs are dictated by the majority, then, the Dimitri choice of deviating will not change the continuation of Dimitri, but it will increase the stage utility because Dimitri is is accepting a price which is below their value. So Dimitri will have a strict incentive to do so. Okay. And so it's this common interest across these consumers that makes this common value across this consumer that makes it very difficult to sustain, to coordinate on leaving money in the table in the short run. Okay, so this the myopic choice of the consumers is not, to me, is actually quite, if you like, defendable, or in some sense there are ways to think that is an outcome of non-myopic agents. Okay. And the other things that I want to, since I only have 5 minutes, maybe the other things that I only want to talk about is how to break the result on the top. Okay. We show that you cannot learn at the top. So learning below P at 1 exploit heterogeneity in the willingness to pay across characteristics. This is what we saw in the second part. We learned that different consumers with different characteristics belong to different buckets of willingness to pay, and then we mix them, and by mixing them, we can create segments where we can create a lot of price experimentation. But we also saw that we cannot use this in order to persuade the seller to charge price above at P1. Okay? Now, this is, in some sense, is a very robust result. In some sense, it's not robust. It's not robust in this context. Now, suppose that the decision rule of the consumer is still myopic, but it's stochastic. So consumers buy if the price is very, very low relative to their willingness to pay. Consumers don't buy if the price is very, very high relative to the willingness to pay. When the price is close to the willingness to pay, they buy with some probability. And maybe this probability depends on the distance between valuation and price. So this is a typical myopic, is a typical decision rule where there is stochasticity that can be interpreted in many ways. Okay? In fact, it can be interpreted as mistakes. When the price is very similar to my willingness to pay, I don't pay a lot of attention. Sometimes I buy when I shouldn't. Sometimes I don't buy when I should. Or it could be the case, in fact, that consumers are they are myopic, but in their particular period they are behaving rationally. But there is a little bit of heterogeneity in the willingness to pay. So everybody has a willingness to pay, which is V star C plus some noise. So if I charge a price which is close to V star C, most of the people buy, but there are some people that actually don't buy because their willingness to pay is below. Okay? So now note that in this environment, if you charge, now define what is the P at 1 in that word, because now the demand is going to be a little bit different. It's a combination of F and T stochasticity. Okay? Now define this P at 1. Now, whenever you charge this price and you look at the consumer with characteristic C, then either everybody with characteristic C buys, that means that their value is quite higher than the price that I've charged. Or when I see that nobody buys, I know that their value is quite below the price, or I see that the proportion of those consumers buy. Okay, so now the price creates a little bit more information because there is also a dimension of quantity. Okay, so in that environment, what has happened is that at the end of the first period, I actually learned that there are some consumers that have a value strictly above P at 1. and I learn for sure. So now my new posterior is that now I can define a market where there are only consumers that have a value strictly above P at 1. Okay? And I can give the seller this market. Now, when the seller creates this market, now the seller doesn't want to charge any more P at 1. Will want to charge a price which is higher than that. Because now is not, the inframarginal calculations, they're not anymore the same. They are different because I have consumers which have a strictly higher value than P at 1. And that one allow the platform to learn all the demand just by looking at how individual with a particular characteristic behave. Okay? So I don't do any mixing. I don't mix it with other things. I just take a particular characteristics. I offer them a price, and then I refine the demand upward until I learn exactly what is their value, because I charge them a price where only a proportion of them buys. And that allows me to identify the star if I know exactly this stochastic function rho. Okay? So there is a big difference between learning, if you like, at the bottom, learning at the bottom of the uniform price. You don't need all these things, but what you need to be able to use heterogeneity across willingness to pay. This is very difficult to use the heterogeneity to persuade the seller to price above the uniform price. If those pricing creates some noisy signals around evaluation because of the stochasticity coming from some residual heterogeneity in willingness to pay, or by some attentions issues of the consumers, then that will allow you to learn slowly through the demand. Okay, but there are two different ways to do it, and that's it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the very nice presentation today. You already touched briefly the point of non-myopic consumers, and I fully understand why you still have an equilibrium where everybody behaves as before. But let me continue on that. But there is also a lot of other equilibria, right? Where consumers behave differently. In particular, if they are sufficiently patient, there should be equilibrium where, let's say, I do not buy until I get the lowest, like very lowest possible price, right? Isn't it? Because I know that the seller will, or seller will offer some price, then nobody buys. Okay, we lower the price, nobody buys, we lower the price, and then they will be able to achieve the lowest price, the lowest possible price, like let's say zero price or marginal cost price. And this does not require cooperation. It's perfect like equilibrium behavior here, isn't it?
So it's really, you see, the point is that if I know that this is what happened, because they say most of the people are just waiting, and the platforms will update based on the fact that these people are waiting, then yes, I'm happy that the price is going to go to zero. But in the meantime, why should I not eat the cake that is offered me every day? This is the problem. The problem is that today, I have a value of 0.8. I know that the price is going down 0.6, 0.5, 0.4. Okay, this is under the assumption that the platform is updating the belief by seeing that the majority always refuse this sequence of prices. Okay, but now I'm an individual there, and I say, look, even if I accept, the platforms will ignore me. So why should I reject today a price of 0.5? It's still value for me. Today I buy it, I consume it, and I keep consuming it. And this is the problem of coordination. Now, of course, this requires this out of equilibrium belief that when I see everybody doing something and I see somebody do something different, then I go with the majority. Now you may say, I don't like that equilibrium refinement, so I can go start equilibrium. But it's not that, it's not that straightforward. You need coordination. Okay, and if now it's very difficult to formulate this refinement in a more elegant way here because I have a continuum of consumers. But if I was going to write down the model where I don't have a continuum of consumer with characteristic C, but I have a discrete number of consumer with characteristic C, I could rule out those equilibria where people are coordinating to non-myopic strategy by trembling. Okay, because you see, like if we coordinate in rejecting all this sequence of offers, and with some probability we make a mistake, when the platforms observe that I accepted instead of rejecting it, they will just the belief system will converge to the fact that I should ignore Dimitri accepting because he just made a mistake. Okay, and therefore all those equilibria are eliminated. Okay, so this refinement is not the stage. It's difficult to define it within the continuum, but there is like an analogous. So now, what you are saying is a way of like a very interesting problem if you only have one in one consumer. Suppose I look one consumer, okay? Then yes, then the story is different, and we are working on exactly that model. And you are right that if the discount factor is very large, then there are also situations in which you're just waiting, and you get a kind of a cause conjecture type of result. Okay, but we don't have a full characterization of that. But if you believe that the environment that I'm looking at, having a lot of consumer with the same characteristic, is a good approximation, then I would say that actually the myopic assumption is actually a good assumption, even if consumers are forward-looking. But so I hope this clarifies a little bit.
Yeah, just a final point, and I shut up. Yeah, so basically, I think it also depends a little bit on the type of goods. Yeah, so you mentioned like if they need the good in every period, then I trust your predictions way more than they say they need to purchase something once and leave the market forever, right? Because then I may wait for lower prices and say play equilibrium, which I mentioned. But if you are right, if I need the good every period, then fine. Why I should wait? I will just buy whatever it's below my value.
Okay. No, very good. So this is I'm looking at this non-durable good. If it is durable, yes, that will make it different. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you to you. Daniel.
Yes, I have a question regarding your requirement when you discussed your result with learning at the bottom, where you required that the characteristic set has to be somehow dense. I was wondering, why do you need this per se? Because now let's assume there is no characteristic set between, let's say, P1 and P2. You can still mix with the highest segment and induce any price anyway. So
No, that's not true. So the problem is exactly this, is that, suppose that, suppose just because it's easier to see it here, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So suppose that, I have nobody here.
Yes.
Okay? And now I want to induce any price between PR3 and PR2. Okay?
Yes.
Now note, then the only thing I can do is taking the green and taking some of the blue.
Yes.
Okay. Now look, when I start taking the green, and at the beginning, when there are only green, I put PR3. Then I'm starting adding blues, so the price goes up, the price goes up, the price goes up. Okay.
Yes.
But there is no guarantee that at some point I just don't want to jump right away. And in fact, I will never want to charge PR2. You see, any price close to PR2, I never want to charge it, because at PR2, I only get those consumers. So why should then the demand is totally inelastic from PR2 to PR1? So I will never want to charge any price at PR2. And so even any price which is PR2 minus epsilon, I never want to charge, because what do I gain by charging PR2 minus epsilon relative to charging PR1? Is only this very small mass of consumers here. Okay, so now we could provide a characterization without a large n. It will be just a bit messy. Okay, because it will depend on the specific realization we start. But it will be very similar to what I've done, but I need to make a lot of qualification. So having enlarged is just make the result, much smoother. In fact, in the original version of the paper, which because we still have to update it because we are working on this revision, we started with a continuum of characteristics. If you have a continuous characteristic, you don't have any more n. But if you think a bit more carefully, there is some issues of measurability when you have all that. So then we just work with that. Okay, but I think that it is more as a technical assumption, you know, and the large n is just makes the result easier to state. Yes. Evgeny.
Hello. I have a few questions. One is about the relationship between the stopping, like the time limit of the experimentation and epsilon. Like how long does the learning take?
Yeah. So actually, I have a result, so I'll put it here. Okay. And so essentially, suppose that you want to learn, okay? You want to epsilon learn. Okay, you want to do like a epsilon learn. So essentially, what you need to do, you need to do this homogeneous market segment, this homogeneous segmentation. You need to do it for how many period? Well, you need to do it for as many period as the last price that you charge, the lowest price that you charge is an epsilon away from the lower bound. Okay? And if you do that, then essentially you have created all these buckets, and now you can create, you know, you can learn everything below PI. Okay? So what is that, you know, in the uniform case? That would be log of epsilon divided by minus log of epsilon divided by log of 2. Okay? Because in the uniform case, you do half, you do a quarter, 1/8, 1/16, and you want to go down until you are an epsilon below. Okay? And once you've done that, then and this is you know, you cannot do faster than that. Now, what is actually interesting here is that suppose that you want to epsilon learn the valuations above V, so not above, you know, not everything below P at 1. Suppose you only care, let's say, P at 1 is half, if you are in the uniform, and you only want to learn the valuations that are above 1/8. Okay, because the one below you don't care because they're small, something like that. Okay, so then what you do the homogeneous market segmentation until the lowest price is very close to 1/8, an epsilon away from 1/8. Okay, and then once you have that, you can learn everything between 1/8 and half. So there is the accuracy here, the epsilon here is not that important, because once you tell me I want to learn all this range, then I can create as many price experimentation as I want, because I have a lot of consumers. I have a continuum of consumer of this characteristic. So I can create any market segment that I want, meaning that I can create I can learn with accuracy as much, you know, with any form of accuracy. That does not require time. What requires time is to segment, is to learn below, going down in the demand curve. Because the incentive compatibility of the seller is that I always want to exclude people below of a certain value. Okay, so I need to do this homogeneous market segmentation so that I go down, down, down until I hit the value that I want to learn, and then I can segment. I can segment, and you know, what is the number of periods is exactly the number of periods as that this price is actually called MV. This is well defined. This can be defined recursively. Is the optimal price given that the consumers have a value between 0 and PTV minus 1 of the previous period with the distribution. Okay? In the uniform case, it's just half 8 is like, half 8 is 16 and so on and so forth. Okay? So that's the formula.